US President Joe Biden has made some very big waves in AI policy by signing a sweeping executive order to guide the development and oversight of artificial intelligence in the US. Now, Paul, like you mentioned, we're actually recording this on the morning of Monday, October 30th. And the order came out just a few hours before we started recording today. So, this order includes things like new consumer protections around AI. It requires companies to meet certain safety standards, and it tasks federal agencies with regulating AI risk. Now, there are a ton of different elements to this order, and we're going to unpack some of them. Here are a handful of them across some of these different topic areas that jumped out to me as particularly significant. Um, First up, the order actually includes requirements that companies developing AI systems share their safety test results with the US government in certain cases. The Department of Commerce is going to be developing guidance for content authentication and watermarking to clearly label AI generated content. We are going to start protecting Americans' privacy by prioritizing federal support for accelerating the development and use of privacy preserving techniques. And that can include ones that use AI and let AI systems be trained while preserving the privacy of the training data. There's a stipulation about ensuring fairness in the use of AI throughout the criminal justice system. We are also getting work on shaping AI's potential to transform education by creating resources to support educators who are deploying AI enabled educational tools. There is going to be the development of principles and best practices to mitigate the harms and maximize the benefits of AI for workers by addressing things like job displacement, data collection, and labor standards related to AI. And kind of last but not least, and again, this is just a sample of what's in there. The government is accelerating the rapid hiring of AI professionals as part of a government wide AI talent surge that's led by the Office of Personnel Management and a couple of other federal organizations. Now, Paul, this statement released by the White House says, quote, with this executive order, the president directs the most sweeping actions ever taken to protect Americans from the potential risks of AI systems. How big a deal is this actually?
It is a really big deal. So I think it's important to first know that executive order isn't law. Like the president can't make law without Congress, but it has significant meaning, and they can enforce it in a lot of different ways, directly and indirectly, I guess. So I think that first we have to accept this is it. Like this is what we're going to get in the United States for the time being. I don't know that they would do any follow-on executive orders, but we have to be realistic that the current state of the US Congress is probably not coming to any kind of bipartisan agreements on any new laws around AI. We obviously had enough trouble just getting a speaker in our Congress. So I just don't see anything major happening before the next election. And so we're probably looking into 2025 before we're probably going to get any real laws around this. So I think it's significant in that it has far-reaching implications, but it's also significant in that this is what we're going to probably have in the United States related to laws and regulations. So a recurring topic on this podcast is like, what is the US doing about this? This is your answer. This is what the US is doing and is going to be doing probably for the next 16 plus months is my best guess at the moment. So for me, we kind of knew this was coming. I saw it. I think I put it on LinkedIn on maybe Saturday night. There was like a political article that sort of tipped off that this was likely coming on Monday morning. So you and I were kind of ready for it, and we're hoping it was going to drop before this podcast started. And it did. But I would also say as of 10:30 a.m. Eastern time Monday morning, all we have is the fact sheet right now. So the White House released a fact sheet and they launched AI.gov, or maybe AI.gov was a thing. And it was the first time I went on it this morning. Um, we do not have the full executive order yet. So the commentary we can provide is based on the fact sheet and what we've been able to kind of ascertain since then. So this morning, I kind of started by going back and looking in October 2022, the US government released the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And in that blueprint, they outlined 5 principles around the design, use, and deployment of automated systems to protect American public in the age of artificial intelligence. And so I think that blueprint sort of started to set the stage for the kind of things we should expect to see in this executive order. And at that time, they dealt with safe and effective systems, discrimination and protections for consumers, data privacy, notice and explanation when automated systems were being used. Again, it's largely about protection of consumer rights. And then human alternatives, considerations, and fallback, meaning you should be able to opt out where appropriate and have access to a person rather than AI if you want it, things like that. So we kind of had some indications. What I was looking for, I kind of made my list before I read the fact sheet about what I want to see in it or what I expected. The first was jobs in the economy. The second was misinformation and disinformation. The third was elections and democracy. The fourth was consumer safety. The fifth was impact on open source AI and the concept of regulatory capture that the big tech is basically driving these things. Um, so that's like some context around kind of how I viewed this. The other thing I think is really, really important because we're going to get into a little bit here of our perception of this executive order, or at least the early iteration of it we're seeing. Um, but I think as you try and form your own perspective on this, you have to understand who you're listening to. And this goes for anything. This goes for politics, it goes for media. You have to understand the context of why people say what they say. So the way I look at this, and I started kind of outlining this morning of like the different groups who would talk about this. The first one you have to be very conscious of are the doomers. These are the people that are winning most of the mainstream media headlines right now about AI and the existential risk to humanity. They would be considered kind of the loud minority. So if you look at the AI research community, there are very few of them who actually worry intently about existential risks to humanity from AI. But the ones who do, like Jeff Hinton, are the ones who are on 60 Minutes touting this stuff and worrying about it. So they believe generally. So when you have to assess the lens someone is looking at this executive order through. So the doomers believe we should slow down. They struggle to find practical explanations of how they arrive at these doomsday scenarios, but they generally lean on this idea that AI is going to become super intelligent or it's going to emerge somehow, and that the AI is going to have no use for us humans, or bad actors are going to exploit this technology in some incredibly nefarious way that leads to a catastrophic outcome. But they struggle often to make these arguments tangible. The thing that's tricky about the doomers is their motivations seem very honest. Like there doesn't seem to be ulterior motives to someone like a Jeff Hinton. Like, why do you leave Google and go out on a media tour, which you've never done, and talk about these things? It appears as though he truly believes this. So that's kind of the doomer mentality. But most AI researchers believe the doomers are misguided. So again, it is the loud minority. It is not the common viewpoint. So you may hear doomers relation. The other one is that we talked about last week is the optimist or the accelerationist. These are the people that believe that rapidly advancing technology leads to growth and abundance, period. That there are downsides, there are negatives, but at the end of the day, the faster you move, the more you create technology, the better off humanity is. So to go back to Mark Andreessen's techno-optimist manifesto and pull two quick excerpts. Technology is the glory of human ambition and achievement, the spearhead of progress and the realization of our potential. We believe growth is progress, leading to vitality, expansion of life, increasing knowledge, higher well-being. So the optimist accelerationist will have a bit different perspective on the executive order. The third, I just generically called big tech. I don't know what else to call these people. They are the ones pushing for the regulation. This is Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, Anthropic, Inflection, all the leaders in the foundation model business right now, the ones building the most powerful models. They're the ones that are loudest about the need for regulation. Now, these are tricky ones to assess because on the surface, it seems altruistic. Like it seems like they truly believe in the importance of regulation. But in reality, they have significant financial motivations to maintain the lead that they've established. So they have the most to gain and they also have the most to lose. So it's hard to assess the true meaning of why big tech is pushing for this. And then the fourth group, which is where I would put myself, I think, Mike, this is probably where you would fall. I don't want to speak for you, but you can offer your thoughts, is the rationalists.
Mm,
And so this is the people who are focused on near-term challenges that are presented by the current models and the ones we can kind of project out, for the next year. We're worried about autonomous weapons, systematic bias in products and services, disinformation and misinformation, synthetic media, disruption to jobs, educational systems, and the economy. The rationalist can be pro AI, like you can be for progress in technology, and you can believe some of the things that the optimists believe, but you try and balance that with human interests and ethical considerations.
mm,
So we don't, in the rationalist world, you don't assume everything is just going to work out the faster you progress technology, but you tend to focus on tangible problems rather than long-term threats. So again, as we've said on the show, like I don't not worry about existential risk to humanity. I'm not sitting here saying there's a zero chance that something catastrophic happens,
mhm.
but I don't find it productive to spend my time thinking about that very much. So I'll stop there for a minute, Mike, and just see, like, to make sure, see if there's any thoughts you have maybe on the four personas, because you and I haven't even talked about this. This was literally like this morning. I'm trying to like wrap my head around how to assess this and how to
Mhm.
share this with people. So did you have any thoughts on kind of that persona approach?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I love the approach. I actually think it's probably a pretty smart way to approach any subject,
Yeah, life
regardless of
in general.
AI. So, yeah, this is like a life pro tip for sure. It's like understanding the landscape of interested parties and the broad groupings of them. And I would also agree with those groupings. And I think in some cases, probably what's important to reiterate to people is yes, everyone in these groups has different agendas, but you would probably be surprised how many people in big tech companies are both incentivized with that financial motivation, which just is reality, but also how many of them seem to truly believe that the techno optimist outcomes are the ones that they should be working on and working on in that way. So this whole, the Silicon Valley phrase "move fast and break things," right? I think was maybe coined by one of the big tech companies. Maybe it was Facebook. I don't recall, but
It's really
basically
made
it's this.
popular by Facebook.
Yes, and it's this mentality that that breaking things is not only okay, but sometimes it's advisable because it means you're moving fast enough to race to market to develop certain technologies. And that is exactly what we're seeing here. And I think the rationalist perspective is probably like, hey, let's move fast and break fewer things, right?
Yeah,
Or at
let's do
least
it
be concerned
safely.
about how they can break.
Yeah,
um, so
yeah,
yeah,
and
I would agree generally with your assessment. I think it's spot on, and it's really, really important for people to understand these different groups. And I think it sounds like from some of the reporting so far on the executive order, a lot of this came out of the government looking at their perceived failure with social media as a
yeah.
technology. I think some people within the Biden administration, it sounds like, felt like they had dropped the government had dropped the ball on stopping these people from breaking things by moving so fast. And so you're seeing this, but just on steroids. So I think they recognize that, which is positive.
Yep. Yeah, and I think so like going back to then the lens with which I look at the executive order, I look at personally as a rationalist. Like that is just kind of how I generally approach everything in life, is trying to be reasonable and logical about the arguments and trying to think of both sides. I think you have to accept that the executive order is most likely largely influenced by big tech. Of the
Mhm.
four groups, that is largely who has been sitting in these meetings. It appears they've tried to balance it with some of the doomers. There's, certainly those voices have had an effect in different ways. I think they've pulled in some of the optimists, accelerationists, some of the open source advocates, the people who are really championing the need for open source. But most likely, big tech would be the most influential group
Mm.
in this kind of persona analysis. So, with all that being said, here is my overall take so far. Um, Again, keeping in mind all we have is a fact sheet and an outline of key things. The fact sheet does not offer very many specifics, if any specifics, on how they're going to do it, how fast they will do it, or how much money the government will invest to do it. So while there are lots of really promising ideas here, and they do address a wide range of issues, um, there isn't much in this fact sheet that tells you when any of this will happen or how they're actually going to adhere to it. Like the idea of AI generated content being, tracked and reported. How? Like that
Hmm.
that may be a 5-year thing before they have any way to do that with text. Like we know images that might be possible, and so when I go back to my list of the things I was looking for, jobs in the economy, basically they said we're going to study it. That there will be a study conducted on the impact of labor, and that we will make it easier for people to come to the United States and work on this technology. And in fact, AI.gov, the navigation of that site has build your AI skills, which links to a bunch of foundations and stuff. And then it has bring your AI skills to the US. Those are literally two of the 4 links in the navigation. So that was my take on jobs in the economy. Misinformation and disinformation, they certainly address it. And they largely talk about the need to identify the AI generated content, which again, there's no near term solution for. So don't know when they're going to do that or how they're going to do it. They don't directly talk about elections and democracy. It's sort of like probably passively related to a lot of things that are mentioned. Consumer safety, it's all over it. That's basically the premise. It's the thing they can control because they
Yeah.
can't create laws, but they can force government agencies to enact or to govern existing laws more aggressively, and they can push for agencies to adhere to kind of new policies and principles. So they can affect consumer safety probably the most. And then the impact on open source and this idea of regulatory capture, it's honestly not clear to me yet. Like I need to see more commentary from those people to see how they're perceiving it, because it wasn't very clear to me how they would. So the 2 people I have seen, as I mentioned, I have not seen much commentary at all yet
Mm.
this morning. This is like 3.5 hours old. One was Jack Clark, who is the co-founder of Anthropic. I would put them in the big tech category. He was also previously policy director at OpenAI and an AI reporter at Bloomberg prior to that. He had about a 6-tweet thread, but one said proof is obviously going to be in the implementation, but the executive order gets a bunch of different parts of government to create capacity for third-party measurement, oversight, and analysis of AI systems, which seems broadly helpful. And then we had Aaron Levy, the CEO of Box. He said Biden's AI executive order is the gold standard for how governments should be regulating AI right now. Thoughtful but scoped oversight focused on practical risks, emphasis on privacy and security, focus on R&D across the ecosystem, and encouraging use of AI in the government. That would seem like a rationalist take to me.
Yeah.
And again, I lean in the direction of I think this is an accurate assessment of it, but until I read the actual 111 page or so executive order, I
Mhm.
can't say this to be true because there just isn't enough information to go on yet.
So it sounds like as some of the initial reporting from the Associated Press around this, which definitely had some quotes directly from people within the administration, it sounds like they've been thinking about this issue for a while, but also planning potentially this to be a springboard for broader voluntary commitments from tech companies, but also possible legislation. But what you're saying here is it sounds like this is what we're getting for the next year and a half. So people should be considering not holding their breath probably for some sweeping legislation like the AI Act in the EU. Is that correct?
I mean, I hope I'm like pleasantly surprised by Congress's ability to figure out how to do anything at all right now, more or less be bipartisan on an issue. Um, so I hope that happens, but no, I wouldn't hold my breath thinking that Congress is going to somehow come together and put laws in place. But I would love to be wrong.
And so that's not totally surprising. The regulatory framework, or at least the way it looks like it's shaping up, is going to be very, very different in the US compared to the EU, which has been broadly true with a lot of data privacy and technology focused legislation over the last several years.
Yeah, and it's going to be one of those things where I mean, keep in mind that the companies building these foundational models are almost exclusively based in the US, at least the ones that are going to be broadly used right now.
Right.
And so they're going to be affected by EU's AI Act regardless, and it may impact the way that they have to build these things anyway. So it's not like the EU isn't going to have any effect on the US. It could, but I just feel like it's going to take 2024 to see a lot of these ideas through that are even outlined in this fact sheet,
Mhm.
and to figure out how to govern these things and to get the studies underway that they talk about, because so much of the fact sheet of the executive order is about research and analysis and establishing frameworks and putting bodies in place to do this, and hiring AI researchers within, government agencies. And it's this, you don't flip a switch and see all these ideas come to life at like January 2024. This is going to be a prolonged implementation of this vision, I guess.
Yeah, and as we wrap this up here, just a quick weird shout out from this article. They go into all the extensive steps the Biden administration had kind of gone through to understand artificial intelligence, talking with experts, doing a lot of research and fact finding. So it's very clear they were deeply involved in the subject, but they had some like bizarre shout out to the new Mission Impossible movie. And they spent like a paragraph talking about how as all this stuff was happening and being formulated, that Biden watched the new Mission Impossible movie, which apparently is about AI taking over. It's like the
Jesus.
villain, and came away like with a better appreciation of what could go wrong. And I was like, I don't know if that's going to be your primary source for this, but hey, shout out to Mission Impossible for raising awareness of AI risks.
For some reason, I'm picturing like a weekend of movie night at the White House where they were watching like Her and Ex Machina
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Mission Impossible, and like now I'm a little worried. This is gonna work.
It wasn't, I want to make it very clear that's not the only thing that made them aware of this, but it was kind of a
That's
funny and
funny.
bizarre shout out.
Yeah,
This
that's
article.
weird.